I'm Alice Thompson, 72 years old, a simple woman who has lived a quiet life in the small town of Ridgewood. My life wasn't extraordinary, just the typical routine of a mother, wife, and grandmother. I raised my children with love, cooked meals, and made sure they knew what it meant to work hard and live honestly. I spent most of my years in the kitchen, serving meals, offering advice, and being the matriarch of my family. But my life took a drastic turn on the day my daughter, Clara, was laid to rest. The funeral was supposed to mark the end of a painful chapter. Little did I know, it was only the beginning of an even darker and more shocking tale. The air in the funeral home was heavy, thick with grief. Family members and friends murmured their condolences as I sat quietly in the front row. My daughter's death had left a hole in my heart that felt too deep to ever fill. But nothing could prepare me for what happened when the last mourner walked out. My son-in-law, Richard, approached me with a cold, almost calculating look in his eyes. He stood there, with his arms crossed, his gaze unblinking. "Alice," he began, his voice void of the warmth I had once known, "there's nothing left for you. Everything's been settled." I blinked, my heart racing. Was he really saying what I thought he was? The words hit me like a slap in the face, but I refused to let the tears show. Instead, I gave him a puzzled look, unsure of what he was referring to. He went on, as if he was doing me a favor. "Clara left you nothing. No house, no money. Everything has been taken care of. You should pack up and go back to your place. There's nothing left here for you." I felt a sudden surge of heat rise up my neck. This wasn't the man I had trusted. This wasn't the man who had married my daughter with promises of love and respect. But the shock wasn't over. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper so that no one could overhear. "In fact, the estate is mine now, and you're no longer welcome here." I stood there frozen, the weight of his words sinking in like quicksand. My heart was heavy with disbelief. I had raised Clara. I had given her everything I had, but this man, this stranger I had welcomed into my family, was now claiming that I had nothing. Then, as he turned to leave, something in me shifted. I felt a coldness settle deep in my chest, and I knew I wouldn't let him take what was rightfully mine. Without saying a word, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Richard's eyes widened as I calmly handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked, confused and irritated. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the deed to the house, the title to everything Clara left, and the $10 million she put in my name before she died." Richard's face paled as I watched him open the envelope. His hands trembled as he pulled out the documents, his confusion turning to panic. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "Clara didn't leave you anything, Richard," I continued, my voice now colder than ice. "But she left me everything. You never knew, did you?" I walked out quietly, leaving Richard standing in that room, holding the very documents that would destroy him. But that was just the beginning. As I walked out of the funeral home, my heart raced. I had just stepped into a game where I had everything to lose. But I also knew that Richard had underestimated me. He had no idea what I was capable of. What was he going to do next? And what lengths would he go to in order to take back what he thought was his? Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. I stayed in the house Clara had left me, trying to process everything that had just happened. Richard's betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. How could he claim everything and throw me out like some unwanted relic? I spent hours going through the paperwork Clara had left behind. There were wills, property deeds, and business documents, all signed and sealed with my name. She had left everything to me, knowing that I would protect it, that I would keep it safe. And yet Richard thought he could take it all with a few words. I was on the phone with my lawyer, trying to figure out the next step when the knock came. It was late, and the last thing I expected was a visit from Richard. But there he was, standing on my doorstep, his face flushed with anger. "You can't do this," he yelled, his fists clenched. "You think this is yours? You think Clara left you all of this for you to keep? You're nothing but an old woman trying to cling to what's mine." His words stung, but I held my ground. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. "This is not yours," I replied, my voice firm. "Clara made her choices, and she made them clear. You have no right to any of this." But Richard wasn't ready to give up. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper. "I've got a lawyer too, Alice," he sneered. "And if you don't hand over the deeds and the money, I'll make sure you never see a dime of it again. I'll make your life miserable." I didn't flinch. I wasn't afraid of him. In fact, seeing him so desperate made me feel a strange sense of power. "You can try, Richard, but I've got a plan too." His eyes narrowed as I slowly closed the door in his face. I knew I had to be careful, but I also knew I wasn't going to back down. This fight was just beginning, and I was ready for whatever he threw at me. As I locked the door, I felt the weight of what had just happened. Richard wasn't going to let this go easily. But I wasn't about to let him take away what Clara had left for me. The real test was only just beginning, and I was prepared to win. The next few days were filled with tension. Richard kept trying to contact me, sending letters and making phone calls, but I ignored him. He wanted me to panic, wanted me to give in to his threats, but I wasn't going to let him control me. Instead, I focused on something else, something I hadn't thought about in years. Clara's old business ventures. The ones she had built up before she passed. Richard didn't know about them, and I intended to keep it that way. One afternoon, while I was going through some of Clara's old files, I found a document that made my heart stop. It was a letter from Clara's lawyer, detailing a secret account she had opened in my name. The account contained a fortune far beyond what I had ever imagined. I couldn't believe it. Clara had known all along that I might need to protect myself. She had left me the means to fight, to take control back from Richard. This wasn't just about money. It was about power. But just as I was absorbing this revelation, there was a loud knock at the door. I froze. This time, it wasn't Richard. It was the police. I stood frozen in front of the door, staring at the two uniformed officers standing on my porch. My heart pounded in my chest. I hadn't expected this. I had never been involved with the law, not like this. My hands trembled as I slowly reached for the doorknob, wondering if Richard had somehow managed to pull strings to get the police involved. The officers stood tall, their faces serious, but there was no hostility in their posture. One of them, a middle-aged man with a kind face, spoke first. "Good evening, ma'am. We need to speak with you about an ongoing investigation regarding your late daughter's estate." I blinked, trying to process his words. What kind of investigation? My daughter had passed away, but there hadn't been any legal matters that had required the police. Or so I thought. "I'm Alice Thompson, Clara's mother," I said, trying to sound calm, though my voice shook. "What's this about? Has there been some mistake?" The officer nodded, his voice softening. "It's about some financial irregularities regarding her estate. We've been looking into it, and we believe there are some things that need to be cleared up." My stomach dropped. Clara had always been so meticulous about everything. How could there be irregularities? This didn't make sense. "Is there something wrong?" I asked, a slight edge creeping into my tone. "We need to check the paperwork related to the properties she left behind," the officer replied, and my heart skipped a beat. "We have reason to believe there may be discrepancies." Discrepancies? My mind raced. Richard must have known about this, must have tipped off the authorities to make it look like I had done something wrong. I had to act fast. "I don't have anything to hide," I said, standing tall. "But if you need to see the documents, I have them all right here. I've been handling my daughter's estate since she passed." The officer glanced at his partner, who nodded, and they both stepped inside. I led them to the living room, where Clara's will, property deeds, and all the legal paperwork were neatly arranged on the coffee table. As the officers sifted through the papers, I could feel Richard's shadow looming over me, his influence seeping into every corner of my home. I had never been so vulnerable in my life. What if they found something? What if this whole thing fell apart? But as they looked through the documents, I noticed something strange. They weren't looking for the things I thought they would. Instead, they were flipping through papers, scanning each one with a deep intensity. The officer who had spoken to me earlier finally looked up, his brow furrowed. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. These documents are in order, but we've been told that Clara's estate has been altered. My mind spun as I processed his words. If Clara's estate was in order, why was I here? Why were the police at my door? Is there something else you need, officer? I asked, keeping my voice steady. The officer shook his head, clearly confused. We're sorry for the confusion, ma'am. We were told there might be some irregularities with the will, but from what we can see, everything checks out. I could feel the tension lifting from my chest as the officer handed me back the papers. But before I could exhale fully, his next words sent a chill down my spine. However, we'll need to speak to Richard. He's the one who made the complaint. We'll be in touch with you if anything else comes up. I nodded, my mind racing. Richard had clearly orchestrated this whole thing.
But why?
Was it just to get me out of the way, or was there something deeper going on? The officers left quietly, and I stood in the living room, staring at the papers on the table. It wasn't over. Richard wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. But I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. Clara had trusted me with this, and I would see it through, no matter what. What was Richard hiding? And how far would he go to get control of everything Clara had left me? The following days were a whirlwind of anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that Richard was plotting something behind my back. I had always trusted him to some extent, but now I knew I couldn't trust anyone, not even the man who had once been part of my family. It was a late afternoon when I received another phone call. I had been in the middle of preparing dinner when my phone buzzed. I picked it up, my heart racing when I saw the caller ID. It was Richard's lawyer. Miss Thompson. The lawyer's voice came through, crisp and businesslike. I'm calling to inform you that Richard has filed a legal claim to the property. He's challenging your ownership and will be going to court. My blood ran cold. What do you mean, challenging my ownership? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. The claim is that Clara's will was forged, the lawyer explained. Richard believes that you manipulated her into changing the will to leave everything to you. He's convinced that the entire estate should be his. I felt my stomach drop. Forged? Manipulated? This was insane. How could he say such things? Clara had trusted me, and I had done nothing but honor her wishes. Tell Richard that I won't back down, I said, my voice now firm. The property is mine, and I will fight to keep it. The lawyer sighed. We'll see you in court, Miss Thompson. I suggest you prepare. As I hung up the phone, I could feel the weight of the situation sinking in. Richard had made his move, but I wasn't going to lose. Not this time. I would fight for what was mine, for what Clara had left me. The next few days were filled with phone calls, meetings with my lawyer, and gathering the evidence I needed. Richard had underestimated me, and now he was going to learn that I wouldn't be pushed around. But even as I prepared for the court battle, I couldn't help but wonder, why was Richard so desperate? What was he hiding that made him go to such lengths? I had to find out. The court date arrived faster than I could prepare for it. My lawyer had assured me that we had a strong case. Clara's will was signed, sealed, and filed long before her death, with no hint of any manipulation. But something still gnawed at me, a lingering feeling that Richard wasn't just after the property. There was something else he wanted, something he wasn't telling me, and I was determined to find out what it was. I stood outside the courthouse, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. My heart raced as I watched people bustle past, but my focus was only on the doors of the courthouse. I wasn't going to let Richard win this. I couldn't. Not after everything I had already lost. Inside, the tension was palpable. Lawyers, judges, and witnesses milled about, and I could feel the cold eyes of Richard side on me. He was sitting across the room, his cold, calculating stare never leaving me. He knew that I had something to fight for, something he desperately wanted. But what? My lawyer led me into the courtroom, and we sat at the plaintiff's table, preparing to face Richard's lawyer. The judge called the proceedings to order, and I watched Richard's smug expression as his lawyer presented his case. We believe that the will presented by Ms. Thompson is fraudulent, Richard's lawyer began. We have evidence that the signature on the will was forged. And more importantly, we have witnesses who claim that Clara was not of sound mind when she signed it. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Was this what Richard had been planning all along? To destroy Clara's reputation and make her appear mentally unstable? I had to keep my composure, but I was burning inside with rage. The lawyer went on. We are requesting that the court invalidate the will and transfer all assets back to Richard, the rightful heir. My lawyer stood up immediately, raising his hand to object. Your Honor, this is baseless. We have the original will, the proper signatures, and all of the required witnesses. There is no evidence of fraud. The judge nodded, turning to Richard's lawyer. Your claim seems to lack substance, but we'll proceed with the hearings. Miss Thompson, would you like to present your evidence? I took a deep breath and stood. The moment had come. I had prepared every piece of evidence Clara had left behind. Her business dealings, her communications with the lawyer, the legal documents proving the validity of the will. It wasn't just about the property. It was about showing Richard that I wasn't the fool he thought I was. As I walked to the witness stand, I could feel Richard's eyes boring into me, trying to intimidate me. But I stood tall, determined to show him that I wouldn't back down. I have the original will here, I said, holding it up for the court to see. It was signed by Clara, witnessed by 2 people, and notarized. Everything was in order when Clara made these decisions. She wanted me to have this property, and I'm simply honoring her wishes. I could hear the murmur of the courtroom as the judge nodded, taking in the evidence. But Richard wasn't done yet. He stood up and walked toward me, a mocking smile on his face. You still don't get it, do you, Alice? He said, his voice dripping with contempt. You think this is just about the property, about money. But you have no idea what I've really been after. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. What was he really after? Tell me, Richard, I said, my voice steady but laced with anger. What is it that you want so badly? His smirk faltered for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear. For a moment, he didn't speak. But then, his voice dropped low, and he said the words that would change everything. I want the control, Alice. Control of everything Clara built. I want it all, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it. The courtroom fell silent. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This wasn't about the property. This was about power. Richard had never cared about Clara's love or legacy. He just wanted to control what she had built. I could see the desperation in his eyes. But I wasn't going to let him win. I knew the truth now. This wasn't about money or a house. This was about something much bigger. Richard had spent all this time manipulating everyone, including me, to get control of everything Clara had worked for. And I wasn't going to let him have it. As the courtroom session wrapped up, I sat there, my mind reeling from Richard's confession. Control. That was what he had been after all along. Not just the house or the money, but the power that came with it. And he thought he could scare me into giving up. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't like other people. I wasn't going to back down, no matter how desperate he became. After the session, I walked out of the courtroom with my head held high. Richard was behind me, his lawyer trailing in his wake, but I didn't care. I had just learned the most important thing. Richard's greed had blinded him to everything Clara had stood for. I needed to act fast. I couldn't let him control the narrative any longer. That night, I stayed up late, going over everything Clara had left behind. The businesses, the assets, the things she had built, things that Richard hadn't even known about. It was time to use them to my advantage. But just as I was about to start making calls, I heard a knock at the door. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be Richard. He wouldn't dare show up here after everything that had happened. But when I opened the door, I was stunned to see someone I wasn't expecting, my neighbor, Joan. Joan stood in front of me, her face pale, her eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. She was the last person I expected to see standing at my doorstep after everything that had gone down in court. She had been my neighbor for years, a friendly woman, always offering a cup of tea or a shoulder to cry on whenever I needed it. But now, her expression told me that something was wrong. Alice, she said in a whisper, her voice trembling. I need to talk to you. It's about Richard. My heart sank. Richard? What now? Was he trying to take matters into his own hands again? I stepped aside to let Joan in, my mind racing with questions. She followed me into the living room, sitting down on the couch, still looking more worried than I'd ever seen her. "What's going on, Joan?" I asked, my voice steady, though inside, I was feeling the tension of the situation rising. "What does Richard have to do with this?" She hesitated before speaking. "I overheard something the other night. Richard was meeting with someone you wouldn't expect. It's not just the property he's after, Alice. It's everything." I felt the blood rush to my head. My stomach twisted into knots. Everything? What was she talking about? Who was he meeting with? I asked, barely able to keep my voice from cracking. Joan looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. "A man from one of Clara's old business dealings. He's been digging into your daughter's financial records, Alice. And I think he's planning something big. Something that will make it impossible for you to keep anything." I could barely breathe. This wasn't just about the house. This was about everything Clara had worked for. The businesses, the assets, the legacy she had built. Richard had gone beyond just trying to get control of the property. He was going after everything. And he had help. But why? I whispered, the question hanging heavily between us. Why would he do this? Joan shook her head. "I don't know, but it's not just for the money. It's more than that. And I think he's planning something soon. Something that will ruin you." I could feel the weight of her words sinking in. Richard had been playing a game I hadn't even known existed. He wasn't just after what Clara left behind. He wanted to destroy me, to wipe out everything that stood in his way. But why was Joan coming to me now? Why had she chosen this moment to reveal what she knew? "I couldn't sit by and let him do this to you," Joan said, her voice soft but firm. "I just had to warn you. I'm not the only one who's heard about it. People are talking, and I'm afraid if you don't act quickly, it'll be too late." The clock seemed to stop ticking in that moment. I had no time to waste. Richard had thought he could outsmart me, manipulate the system, and steal everything that belonged to Clara. But now I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to fight him in court, I was going to beat him at his own game. "Thank you, Joan," I said, my voice steady, but filled with determination. "You've given me exactly what I needed to hear. Richard is going to regret thinking he could outplay me." But as Joan left, her words echoed in my mind. People are talking. The people in Ridgewood, the ones who had been close to Clara, who had watched as Richard wormed his way into her life. What did they know? What had they seen that I hadn't? I needed to find out. Fast. I had the documents, the will, the business records, but I needed something more. Something that would prove that Richard wasn't just greedy. He was dangerous. As I sat back down, I felt a burning desire for justice. I wasn't just going to sit back and watch Richard take everything from me. I would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The next few days were a blur of action. I couldn't afford to waste any more time. I had already contacted Clara's old colleagues, those who had been part of her business ventures, and I'd started to dig deeper into the financial records. There were too many questions, too many pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. Something was off. As I sifted through the records, one document stood out to me. It was a letter from Clara's business partner, someone I had only heard about in passing over the years, Julian Gray. I didn't know much about him, but Clara had trusted him. What had he been involved in? The letter was dated a few months before Clara's death, and it was addressed to Richard. My stomach dropped as I read the words on the page. "We've completed the transfer as discussed. You now have access to everything you need. But remember, Alice must never find out." I couldn't breathe. The words seemed to leap off the page, burning into my mind. What had Clara been involved in? What had Richard promised to Julian? And why had Clara hidden this from me? I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed answers, and I knew where I had to go to get them. The next morning, I drove to the address listed on the letter, an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. As I parked and walked toward the entrance, I felt a chill in the air. The place was eerily quiet, abandoned even. But there was something about it that made my blood run cold. I knocked on the door, waiting. Seconds later, It creaked open, revealing an older man with sharp features and a calculating look in his eyes. "You must be Alice," he said, his voice smooth, but his eyes cold. "Come in." I stepped into the dimly lit warehouse, my heart racing. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, to walk away and forget everything I had uncovered. But there was no going back now. The truth was out there, and I was determined to find it, no matter what it cost me. The door slammed shut behind me with a heavy thud, and I turned to see Julian Gray locking it with a click. He was tall, his dark hair slicked back, his face sharp with the years of experience in business that had given him an air of quiet menace. But what really unnerved me was the way his eyes shifted as he sized me up. He knew who I was. He knew I wasn't afraid, but he didn't know how far I would go. "You've come looking for answers," Julian said, his voice smooth as silk but with an edge that suggested danger. "But you're asking the wrong questions, Alice." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "What are you talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "What do you have to do with Richard? And what is he really after?" Julian smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You think Richard is the only one pulling the strings here?" "No, Alice. You're the one who's been kept in the dark." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. What was he saying? Had everything I thought I knew been a lie? "You've been living in the past," he continued, stepping closer, his voice low. "Clara's will, the house, the money. It's not about that. It never was. The real prize was always much bigger. Richard's just a pawn. You're the one who's been played." My mind raced. I had to get control of this conversation. "What do you mean?" I demanded. "What's really going on?" Julian leaned in, his gaze locking onto mine with a cold intensity. "Clara was smarter than both of you," he said, his voice now barely above a whisper. "She knew Richard was dangerous. She knew he would try to take everything. So she set things in motion long before her death. She didn't just leave you a house. She didn't just leave you money. She left you the key to something far more valuable, a network, a powerful legacy." The words felt like ice water pouring over my head. A legacy? What kind of legacy was he talking about? "You've been running around in the dark," Julian said, almost pityingly. "But Clara set it all up for you. The businesses, the accounts, the connections, they're yours, Alice. All you need to do is claim them." My head was spinning. "Claim them?" I whispered. "What do you mean, claim them?" Julian smiled, as if the pieces were finally falling into place for him. "You're not just a grandmother trying to hold on to a house. Clara made sure you would be untouchable. She put everything in your name, in trust. But Richard, he's too blinded by greed to understand. He's already destroyed his chances, and now it's your turn." I could barely process his words. I had thought everything was about the money, the property, the documents I had. Those were just a small part of something far bigger. I took a step back, my mind trying to catch up with everything Julian was saying. "And what does Richard want? What does he think he's going to get?" Julian's eyes glinted with cold amusement. "Control. He thinks he can control the businesses Clara built, but he's wrong. You have all the power, Alice. You always did." I felt a surge of strength fill me. All these years, I had thought that I was the one being manipulated, that Richard was the one in control. But now I knew. Clara had seen this coming. She had set me up to win. She had left me the tools to fight, the legacy to protect, and now it was all mine. The weight of the situation settled in. I wasn't just a victim. I was the one who held the cards. But as I stood there, with the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, a loud crash broke the silence. The door behind me flew open, and Richard stormed in, his face red with fury. "You really think you can outsmart me, Alice?" Richard shouted, his voice filled with venom. "You think you can just take everything from me and walk away?" I turned to face him, my heart pounding, but this time, I wasn't afraid. He had no power over me anymore. He was just a man clinging to a dream that was never his to begin with. "I don't need to outsmart you, Richard," I said, my voice calm but filled with a quiet strength. "I just need to claim what's mine." Richard's eyes widened as he realized the truth. The truth I had known for weeks now. The truth that Clara had set in motion long before her death. He had lost, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Everything that Clara worked for. I continued. Everything you thought you could take from me. It's all mine. And you will never touch it. You're done, Richard. The room was silent as Richard stood there, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. I could feel the tension in the air, the years of manipulation, greed, and lies crashing down around us. But I didn't care anymore. I had won. I took a deep breath and turned back to Julian. "Thank you for showing me the truth," I said, my voice steady. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's not over, Alice. But now you're ready. The legacy is yours to protect." As Richard stood there, his world crumbling around him, I knew one thing for sure. I had finally taken control. And nothing was going to take that away from me. The weeks following my confrontation with Richard were the quietest I had ever experienced in Ridgewood. The peace I thought I had earned after Clara's death felt fleeting, almost surreal. While the house was mine, and the businesses that Clara had built were secured, there was a nagging feeling at the back of my mind. Something unfinished, unresolved. The papers, the title, the deed, they were all in my hands, but Richard was not a man who would simply walk away. He was a predator, and I had merely pried open the door to his cage. He wasn't done yet. I tried to keep my focus on moving forward, managing Clara's businesses, and rebuilding my life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard would strike again, harder, faster, and more viciously than before. Then, one evening, as I sat in the study, reviewing financial reports, I received an unexpected knock on the door. My pulse quickened. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door cautiously, only to find a well-dressed man standing there, holding a briefcase. He was tall, with sharp features and an air of authority. "Miss Thompson, I presume?" he asked, his voice polite, almost too polite. "I'm here on behalf of Richard." My heart sank. Richard wasn't done. I knew it. "Why don't you come in?" I said, trying to hide the unease in my voice. The man stepped inside, setting the briefcase down on the coffee table before sitting across from me. "I'm here to offer you a deal," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Richard has requested a settlement. He's prepared to give you a large sum of money in exchange for relinquishing control of the estate." I crossed my arms, my mind racing. A settlement? Richard had never been one to negotiate. This was a game. He wanted to test me to see if I would fold. "And why should I trust you?" I asked, my voice cold. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Because if you don't take this offer, Miss Thompson, things will escalate. Richard is prepared to go public with certain information, things that could ruin you." My pulse quickened. What could he possibly know? What did Richard have over me? "You can try to intimidate me all you want," I said, my voice unwavering. "But I won't back down. Tell Richard that his threats don't scare me." The man's smile faltered. "I'm just the messenger, Miss Thompson. But I will let him know that you declined." "It's a shame, really." "The choice is yours." I stood up, my resolve hardening. "Leave." He did, without another word, leaving me to stare at the closed door. But what was it Richard was threatening to expose? I had to find out. The next few days were filled with tension. I couldn't stop thinking about that visit. What could Richard possibly have that could destroy me? What kind of threat was he hanging over my head? I wasn't about to let him win. Not after everything I had fought for. I spent hours digging into every file, every record, every piece of paper that Clara had left me. There had to be something hidden that could protect me if Richard truly had something on me. But as I went through the papers again and again, nothing seemed out of place. Everything checked out. It wasn't until I opened a drawer in Clara's old desk, one I hadn't looked in yet, that I found something I didn't expect. It was a folder, marked in bold letters. "For Alice, read only after my passing." My hands shook as I opened the folder, unsure of what I was about to find. The first page was a letter from Clara herself. My heart stopped as I read the words. "Alice, if you're reading this, then you've already faced more than I could ever prepare you for. I've left something for you, something that will protect you, something Richard won't be able to touch. This isn't just about the property or the money. It's about power. I hope you understand what you need to do. Don't trust anyone, not even those who claim to be your friends. I felt the weight of her words as I read through the rest of the folder. Clara had known Richard better than I ever could. She had anticipated his betrayal, and she had set something in motion that would make Richard's threats meaningless. The final document in the folder was a set of legal papers detailing a secret offshore account. An account Richard knew nothing about, one that held enough wealth to make his claims irrelevant. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the surge of power that came with the knowledge Clara had left me. Richard had no idea what was coming for him. He thought he had the upper hand, but now the tables were turning. I had a plan, and I was going to make sure Richard paid for everything he had done to me, to Clara, and to our family. The day I confronted Richard again was unlike any other. There was no fear in me, no hesitation. I had everything I needed to finally bring him down. I called him, my voice steady. Richard, I know what you've been hiding. I know about the account, the plans you've been making. You can't win. Not now, not ever. I could hear him pause on the other end of the line. He was caught off guard, unsure of what I meant. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice suddenly defensive. I'm talking about everything. The power you've tried to take. The control you think you have. It's over, Richard. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. Then he spoke, his voice laced with a venom I hadn't heard before. You think you've won, Alice? You think you've got it all figured out? You have no idea what I've done. You have no idea how far I'm willing to go to get what's mine. I could feel the tension rising as I prepared for the final confrontation. I'm not backing down, I said, my voice unwavering. This is the end of the line for you, Richard. You'll never get control of what you think you can take. It's mine, and I'll fight for it. The line went silent, but I knew he was scheming, planning his next move. But I was ready. I had already won, and he didn't even know it yet. The day had come. Richard had pushed me to the edge, and I knew this was it. The final act in a long, painful saga. I could feel the weight of everything I had lost, everything I had fought for, hanging in the balance. But now, with the secrets Clara had left me, I was ready. I stood outside Richard's mansion, the house that had once symbolized everything he thought he could control. But now it was just another piece of his empire that would crumble. I had called him one last time, demanding he meet me. I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to play by his rules anymore. When I arrived, Richard was waiting at the door, his face hard, but there was something else. Fear. I saw it in his eyes. He knew. He had finally realized that the game had changed. I thought you were done, Alice, Richard sneered, stepping aside to let me in. But I guess you've decided to fight one last battle. You're going to lose. I'm not here to lose, Richard, I replied, my voice calm and steady, though inside I was burning with the need for justice. I'm here to finish this. To end it once and for all. Richard scoffed, rolling his eyes as he led me into the sitting room. But I wasn't there for pleasantries. I was there to take everything from him, the way he had tried to take from me. I know about everything, Richard, I said, my eyes locking onto his. The offshore accounts, the business deals, the lies you've been telling. You thought you had everything figured out, but you've underestimated me. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable now, his eyes darting to the door. You don't know anything, Alice. You think Clara was some kind of saint? She wasn't. She was just a means to an end. And I'm going to get what I deserve. I will take everything from you, just like I always planned. But I wasn't listening anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out the file. The very file Clara had left behind for me, the one that contained everything Richard never wanted me to see. The documents detailing his schemes, his manipulations, the secret accounts and false documents he had tried to forge. I've known about this for a while, I said, placing the file on the table in front of him. But Clara left me more than just money, Richard. She left me the truth. And now, it's yours to face. Richard's face paled as he glanced down at the papers, his arrogance slipping away. He reached for the file, his hands shaking. I could see it now, the realization that everything he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. "You won't get away with this," he muttered, trying to regain his composure. "I'll fight this. I'll make sure." "No, Richard," I interrupted, my voice unwavering. "It's over. You lost the moment you decided to betray me, to betray Clara. This was never about the money. It was about power. And now you've lost it." As I watched him crumble, I felt the weight of the last few months lift off my shoulders. I had faced every threat, every lie, every betrayal with nothing but courage and strength. And now, Richard was standing there, defeated by the very legacy he thought he could steal. There was silence between us, thick with the finality of it all. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The truth had rendered him speechless. "This house," I said, my voice low and resolute. "This life you thought you could take, it's mine now. Clara made sure of that." Richard's eyes flickered with a mix of anger and fear. But I wasn't finished. I had one last thing to say to him. "Do you remember the deal you tried to make with me, Richard? The one where you thought you could buy me off with money? Clara knew you'd try to do this. She knew you were a liar, a cheat. And now you'll have nothing. Not even the power you thought you had over me." Richard opened his mouth to say something, but I was already turning to leave. "This is over," I said, my back to him. "And you're never going to control me again." As I walked out of the mansion, I felt the weight of everything I had fought for, Clara's memory, my family's legacy, finally resting in my hands. The power was mine, and I was going to protect it,